For my last whiskey of the night, I have something different. I started out with the Goodridge and Williams 100% rye. Then I went to a Benromic 10. Then I had a Aaron Sauterne cask finish. Beautiful whiskey. And this one here is a bit of a Frankenstein bottle. What I mean by that is I started this infinity bottle, about 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't put a date on it, but it's been a while. Now it contains mostly Canadian whiskey. All kinds of Canadian whiskey that I've had over the last 4 or 5 years. There's a little bit of every one of those in there, except for some Shelter Points, because the Shelter Point has its own infinity bottle. But most Canadian whiskeys that I have had in the last 4 or 5 years are in here. Now, that's not too extreme, but about 20% of it is Islay whiskey, peated Islay whiskey. Now, the goal was to produce a whiskey or to blend a whiskey that would start off easy drinking, easy sipping, a little sweet, like a Canadian whiskey. But it would end up with the finish of peat. Let's see how well I did. I've had this several times. The bottle keeps evolving. You know, I'll drink a couple drams from it. In fact, I have 2 bottles like this one. I'll drink a couple drams from it, and I'll drink a couple more drams, and then I'll add some Canadian whiskey, or I'll add a little bit of Islay from my Islay Infinity or from my Canadian Infinity. So that's where the whole Frankenstein thing comes in. This is my infinity bottle of Canadian and Islay Frankenstein on today, which is the 22nd of May, 2021. On the nose, I'm getting a little bit of peat smoke, and I'm getting some corn sweetness. Usual Canadian whiskey thing with some peat. The peat smoke is tarry, but it's not in your face because it is, 75 to 80% of this is Canadian whiskey that's not peated at all. So the peat smoke and tar and creosote is kind of in the background, but it's definitely there because the little peat goes a long way when you're blending. So if this is 20% peated whiskey and the other 75-80% is Canadian, I predict, or should I say that I have always experienced it to be smooth and sweet and nice and easygoing, and then you swallow, or then I swallow, and after I swallow, I get a peat finish. Here goes. Oh. Oh. It's exquisite. it has some really old Canadian whiskey in it as well. Some of it is as old as 43. But the whiskey, this blend itself has a no-age statement because there are some very young things in here too. I mean, it ranges from 2 years old, because there are some spirits in here that were not even old enough to be called whiskey. So it has things from, let's say, a year old or less, all the way to 43 years old. And it has all kinds of peated whiskey from Islay in it. It has Lafroigs, Lagavulins, even some Beaumont. It has some Ardbeg in it, lots of Ardbeg. It has some independently bottled things. It has some Portaskeg. I think it has some Portaskeg. It's got some Bunnahabhain. It's got some Bruichladdich. Got some Port Charlotte. All kinds of peated whiskey. Even some of that Moynia Marsala that I brought home from Scotland. And there's some Dark Cove too. There's just about every peated whiskey and every Canadian whiskey that I've had in the last 4 or 5 years is in this. And like I say, every so often, I pour a dram. And enjoy that Canadian whiskey with the peaty, smoky, chocolate, tar, creosote finish. I think I've succeeded so far. And I know that this is going to evolve some more as I keep adding to it. Oh, did I mention that I have a second one? This one, in a Wiser's Union 52 bottle, started out with slightly different ingredients at the beginning. It had different peated whiskey in it, and it had different Canadian whiskey in it from the other one. But as time goes on, the characters of the two will merge and become more uniform, because as I go on, I am pouring the same things into them. Except that I have 2 Canadian whiskey infinity bottles, and I have 2 Islay whiskey infinity bottles. And I randomly pour from one or the other into each of these. But let's say I pour from Canadian 1 into this one, and Canadian 2 into this one, then Islay 1 into this one, and Islay 2 into this one. And then the next time I may pour a different bottle into it, and so on. So that's also kind of interesting. I think my 2 Canadians and my 2 Islas are close to each other, but the proportions and whatever make each of these infinity bottles, even though they They're similar. It makes each of them unique. It makes each of them enjoyable to me because it starts off light. I get corn sweetness. Corn sweetness and a little bit of rye spice, and then blammo, as soon as I do some swallowing, that's when the peat just kicks in. That's what I like in a whiskey. Variety within one bottle. And I look forward to someday being at a whiskey festival and having my hotel room open to other people at the whiskey festival, coming in and pouring a dram of this special concoction and raising a glass and saying cheers and slanchava to your very good health. This is my art of blending Frankenstein whiskey. To your very good health.
Foodquig.
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 Yeah.